Going live. Weekend don't have to do. That's my good one.
Good evening. I would like to call this meeting to space committee to order. Lisa, could you please call roll?
Mr. Arbogast.
Here.
Mr. Brisbane.
Here.
Mr. Costi.
Here.
Mr. Davis. Dr. Fiorenzo. Here. Ms. Guerrero. Here. Mr. Imam.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Kohler.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Odell. Here. Dr. Simons.
Thank you. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the minutes for our last meeting from June 28th. Does anyone have any questions or corrections to the minutes? And if not, could I have a motion to approve, please?
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We have no members of the public in person. Do we have any Zoom virtual comments from the public? I was hoping that we could flip our agenda around and let the folks from PMA present first. Looks like Fanilla's online. Does that work for you now?
Yes, that works for me.
Okay, great. We have a presentation we're gonna pull up,
Yeah,
or is he presenting?
I'm sorry, Brian, are you doing the presentation or am I?
I assumed you were.
Give me 1 second, just pull it up here. And I apologize in advance. Normally you guys are used to Audra. Audra fell ill yesterday and she's just not feeling well right now. So I am the sub. But I will do my best to fill her shoes. All right, can everyone see that one?
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode. There. No.
All right, so again, good evening. My name is Vinal Patel. I'm a senior vice president at PMA Financial. I think normally you've seen Audra Brasky at this presentation, and I'm gonna do my best to fill in her shoes, but at the same time, I'm very familiar with the account and the history with the district and the investment process. I've been at PMA for over 24, almost 25 years. So very familiar with.
Can you pause for just a second?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, and either the folks in the room, if we could follow along on our devices, or if you could make that like presentation.
Well, he's sharing his screen, so
There's nothing you can do to.
And we're seeing it in like note mode with the next slide.
he has his in presentation mode.
Gotcha. Hold on 1 sec.
There's some, I think you just have to swap.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Apologies for that.
We have a huge audience online watching and want to make sure they can see it.
Absolutely, yes. So tonight we're just going to go over a really quick summary of PMA, just for any new folks in the audience. And the main focus is going to be the cash flow. Where is the district as far as cash flow goes, investment, and then the process that we go through as far as the investment execution and risk management. What can you invest in? And then at the end, we'll talk about what can you expect going forward as far as your investments go. While I'm doing this, definitely please jump in and interrupt me. I'd rather have a discussion than obviously me just going through a PowerPoint. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me.
Let me jump into, just for the benefit of the members of the committee. The district's investment management is one of the items that's on the charge for the committee from the board for us to review occasionally. So that's why we've got it on the agenda tonight. Thanks, John.
Yep. So almost 40 years now, PMA has been working exclusively with the Illinois school districts. Not just Illinois, I'm sorry, school districts and municipalities, but where our ground and our base is Illinois school districts. We, as a company, serve over 4,000 public fund entities. We are a public fund investment advisor. We have a couple of private people, but at the same time, our basis is truly public funds, and over a big chunk of our services are actually geared towards Illinois school districts. So we are experts at Public Funds Investment Act, and we have been serving Illinois schools for over 40 years, almost 40 years. Over $40 billion in investment assets under admin as of June. That number's climbed, but regulators give us only so many milestones we can do every once in a while. And we are also the #1 financial advisor for K-12 school districts in Illinois since 2009. So our specific history with OPRF, we've worked with the district for over 17 years, provided investments for the district, and specifically provided the cash flow analysis that allows the school district to know how much money do you have, how much can you do, how far can you invest, and what is our optimal investment plan. We've worked with the district on its 5-year projection over 10 years, and we've also worked with the district for 9 years on trying to get that and getting the Meritorious Budget Award. So specifically, I think today's conversation is about the cash flow analysis. What can the school district invest in? What does our cash flow look like? How far can we go? And specifically, what are our highs and low points? And then how does that dictate our investment plan? What the cash flow is, or specifically what PMA's cash flow analysis is, it's a formalized organization of your inflows and outflows. So we go through and chart out on a daily basis, what are your revenue sources, what are your expenditures, payroll, AP, B&I, all those pieces. And I equate it to, again, personally, I have a mortgage. If I get paid twice a year, specifically like you do, Cook County, very tax heavy district, I get paid twice a year. I can take some of that money and chart it out, invest it out to every single one of my mortgage payments. And that's very much like a school district. You have payrolls that you know of, you know when your bond interest payments are, you know when your APs are. Let's try to chart that out, because again, for me, yeah, investing monthly is not the best. It's not going to get me the most money, but for a school district with millions of dollars on a monthly basis, just extending some of your investments out for a month can get you thousands of dollars and more interest. And that's been our philosophy. So provides lead time for when you do get those taxes. We will talk about that Cook County issue. Cook County has been, last year it was a problem as far as tax collection goes, and that did cause a couple of issues with OPRF. We did have to sell a couple of investments early because Cook County delayed its taxes. Normally you would have gotten them in September, October, but of course, as you know, that you didn't get those until later in the year. So let's look at your revenues. Revenue-wise, of course, you're very locally heavy. 87% of your tax or revenues come from taxes or local revenues, and then 9% and 4% from state and federal. And again, you could see where on the right-hand side of this slide, the bar graph, you could see most of it we're anticipating coming in December. We've already gotten word that Cook County will be delayed at least a month this fall. So we are anticipating that, and that will affect your investment plan. Again, if you're not getting all those taxes a month ahead of time, that does delay some of your investment potential. It shortens stuff up, but it also stops us from doing some of your investments that we normally could do normally. On the expenditure side, very, quite honestly, very typical of school districts. Salaries, benefits are a majority of your expenditures. Nothing unusual in that. You have some peaks and valleys, but at the same time, nothing unusual as far as how the trend of how you're spending your investments. If we move forward to the this graph, which we call our kind of the total funds balance graph. Again, this excludes capital projects. But what this is trying to illustrate is what are your peaks and valleys? What is your cash balance on a daily basis for the next couple of years? So that top line you see is you get money in, you spend money, and then if you look right, you get taxes in the spring, you spend the money, you get taxes in the fall, you spend it, spring, spend it, so forth. This is a typical Cook County school district graph. The one piece is OPRF has done a phenomenal job of keeping yourself invested and invested wisely. You were invested very well. Unfortunately, when Cook County delayed its taxes, you see this couple of little red pieces here. We had to sell a couple of investments to make up for the shortfall in taxes. Overall, for the year, it did not impact your interest earnings, but at the same time, we did have to adjust our investment plan and adjust our and sell a couple of investments as a result. One of them, or a couple of them, were for losses, but again, overall though, because you were so very well invested and invested to the optimal degree, overall, you will be fine as far as your interest earnings go for the year.
Last
Yep.
year, the Cook County bills were 4 months late. They went out December.
Yes.
The most recent thing I heard for this year was November 1. Is that in alignment with what you've been hearing?
Unfortunately, yes, that is aligned with what we're hearing. November. We're hoping that is the case, but Cook County.
And can you quantify when the impact, as you mentioned, we had to sell at a loss, but the specific impact associated with the delay from Cook County to this district in a dollar value?
That'd be a tough one, only because rates fluctuate. So rates then are different than what rates are now. But I can go back. I can at least tell you what the losses were on those specific investments that we had to sell. And then, so unfortunately, cash flows are very fluid instruments, and it's really hard for me to say, well, you would have done this at this specific rate. And quite honestly, that's one of those like SEC, FDIC things where they really prohibit us from saying your performance would have been better if you followed this path. If that makes sense. Believe me, I'm not shying away from giving you that number, but as financial advisors, we are constrained to certain rules where we can't say, oh, you would have been better off if you did this. If that makes sense. But I can give you the specifics on the losses that you incurred on those investments. And those are direct costs or direct losses as a result from the delay.
It just fills in the discussion we've had, in the past about fund balance level. This is tangible.
Well, that is so. And we've had discussions with a lot of districts in Cook County recently, well-off districts, quite honestly, of you thought you were very well off, but Cook County can certainly derail any and all plans that you might have had. And there are districts actually we work with in Cook County that quite honestly had $50 million in reserves, but the delay, because they are so tax heavy, the $50 million in delay actually ate away at their reserves.
Prior to last year, the fall second installment had been on time for like a decade, but the 10 years prior to that, it had always been late, and I remember during
Yep.
that time in the past when the bills were always going out late, the school business official organizations with folks in Cook County were trying to get together and say, is there a way we can talk about the financial impact of this on us, and can we try to nudge Cook County to do things differently? But the politics of it all is there's not a lot of ability, I think, to influence processes happening there.
Absolutely, and again, we can quantify it, but at the same time, unfortunately, with Cook County politics, the way it is, it's exactly what you said, Steve, is there's not a lot we can do about it. We just need a plan for it.
And one other thing, just to kind of chime in on that, is coming off of last year and that delay in the taxes, when we've worked with PMA for the upcoming year, one of the plans we put in place is to stagger some of our investment maturities so that, you know, coming into this year when we're facing another year of delays, we have investments, fixed rate investments that are maturing in August, September, October, November, kind of periodically month to month, to give us that cash flow needed to kind of combat this, possible delay again this year.
Perfectly placed, Brian. Yeah, that was probably going to be my next point, is we have accounted for the delays and avoiding those sales. So thank you, Brian. And yeah, Brian and has worked with our team, and we are making sure that at least this delay, even November, even if it's shorter than November, we are making sure that you're not going to have to incur those sales again. And so again, back to this graph, you could see this dark blue area is what we would call your long-term investment. So anything beyond a year. And then this darker gray, sorry, I'm colorblind, darker gray area is what we would have placed investments saying, okay, hey, you know what, your taxes are going to come in September. So I can take some of your March money and put it out to September or October. As you can see, and we'll get to the investments here soon, we haven't done that. Twofold, short-term rates are so high that, you know what, you're getting a 5.2% just in a money market right now. We've done other investments. At the same time, the district is very well invested in long-term investments. So overall, you're doing well. You did well over the last 5 years. But at the same time, with the uncertainty with Cook County taxes, it's a little difficult to, quite honestly, take that leap and say, hey, let's put some money out to December right now. And Brian, please jump in if I'm misquoting, but those are the conversations that we've had with the district.
Yes, that's spot on.
So any other questions with this graph? So overall, though, the district low points were still hovering around 40 million, a little less than 40 million based on the projections. So again, overall healthy with balances, but at the same time, as Cook County has illustrated, even those balances can be a little problematic as you work on your fund balance policy. As a district that is so heavily, I'm going to go back to this graph, you get 87% of your taxes. So if you don't get, or at least delay one of your payments, that is a big chunk. And that is what is kind of causing some of that causes consternation within your investment plan. We've adjusted the plan. We are not counting on taxes coming in until at least probably December, but at the same time, that is something that the board and finance committee should keep in mind and an eye on going forward.
And could you explain, so the title says this excludes capital projects.
Yes.
So can you explain? So my question is really why is the long-term investment in the projections, why are the long-term investments decreasing that way? And my first answer is that probably because of the construction projects, but are those excluded?
So twofold, transfers are in there, but when I say capital projects, it's actually your capital projects fund. When you transfer money into that, that's just segregated and that's out there. The other piece is we do use conservative estimates going forward on our side. So quite honestly, we always have expenditures increasing at a slightly higher rate than revenues do. And that's for us. Again, we don't want to overinvest the school district. If I invest as a result of me just putting money out too long for you, that's not what I want. Yes, we had to sell an investment, but that was a Cook County issue. But if we have to sell an investment because I overinvested you, that's just that's not our philosophy. So we always a little bit conservatively estimate our cash flow. Now, it's based on your budget, and then every year we update this. So again, the investment plan, like you do see that the December 24 balance is a little lower than the 23 balance. But come next year, we're updating this with Brian. And we'll have a better plan for that year, for next year's investment plan. But at the same time, I just don't. Illinois school finance is so unpredictable that the state and especially Cook County, I just don't want to overinvest it. I do want to be conservative on your cash flow projections.
You can see when the tax money came in March, there wasn't really an ability to invest out long with a lot of that because of how much long-term investment was already there. And so that was all just invested, as I was saying, out to need dates over the next 6 months. But when the money comes in here in December, there may be an opportunity as some longer things have matured to fill in more of that longer term. Again, he also mentioned it's kind of rate dependent too on what the yield curves look like.
And then I will get into the yield curve a little later on, so you can see why we're not so uncomfortable. Normally, and I'm sure as Steve knows, we definitely want to invest out as long as you can. As if I can do a 6-month CD, I do a 6-month CD, but I'll show you the yield curve and illustrate why, quite honestly, 6-month liquid balances are actually not that bad right now.
Can you speak a little bit more towards how you build a cash flow for capital funds, kind of based on spend down projections? And right now, the district's capital dollars are all just fund balance that's been transferred there. But there will be bonds issued at some point, and kind of how that process works on your end.
Yes, so capital dollars, it's you're gonna have a cash flow based on, and we don't come, you're gonna have a cash flow. You're gonna have a project, you're gonna say, okay, we're doing this and this summer. Here's generally how much it's gonna cost. And then once you transfer that money into the capital projects fund, we'll specifically invest to that project. So again, that's we try to keep operations, payroll, AP, what it takes to run a school district out of those special projects or whatever they might be. Yes, capital is a part of running a school district, but those projects are known, those cash flows are known, so why not specifically invest to those? And we have separate buckets for once you transfer that money, we'll just invest to those specific need dates. They'll meet those need dates, you spend it down, and then those buckets are done.
Thanks.
Again, this is awesome. Any questions on? So again, overall though, district cash flow wise, you're gonna meet your need, you're gonna meet your spend dates, you're gonna meet all your obligations. This is more of an investment. How do we invest? we don't want to overinvest, but at the same time, how do we maximize your investment potential? So Cook County threw us for a loop last fall, but at the same time, we've adjusted and we do feel we have a good course of action going forward with Brian and his group. So what's the investment strategy? So now we have the cash flow. We charted out your investment needs. We're going to execute that. Really, this is just a really quick reminder overview of how we execute that. We charted out your need dates. What do we do? First of all, it's based on your need dates. we adhere to a prudent man concept which is we only execute investments that a prudent man rule would for public entities. And that follows the SLY rules: safety, liquidity, and then yield. First and foremost, PMA has a track record of being a credit company. We started out as a credit company before we even executed any investments. We actually did bank credit reports. So we are a credit company. So safety of principal is key for our guiding principle. Liquidity, we want you to make sure that you have the money when you need it. And liquidity doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be just a money market. Liquidity means it's available when you need it. And that's where the cash flow really comes in. And charting out your cash flow is truly important because we want to make sure you're able to meet your obligations. And then, of course, once we execute investments, we bid your investments out to multiple broker dealers, banks, over 3,000 banks in our network. We have all the top broker dealers that we bid out to. You do not invest in anything PMA owns. And I think that's a crucial point. We're not trying to sell you any particular investment. We're just trying to get you the best rate when you are able to execute that investment. I have no inventory to sell out of. So I'm not pushing you towards an investment. And maintaining public trust. Let's face it, we've been around for 40 years, and we do realize that school districts talk, and we are our reputation means a lot to us. And we do appreciate the trust that school districts put in us, that OPRFs put in us for the last 17 years. And we want to make sure we live up to that standard that you expect. So again, what do you invest in? Everything's allowable. It's state statute within your investment policy. Really quick, again, mainly it's treasuries and agencies, CDs, and demand deposits. Right now, CP, muni bonds, all that other stuff is not necessarily the risk premium is not there, or just their rates are not there. For example, commercial paper. Commercial paper is a direct obligation of a corporation, short-term obligation. Their spread just is not there for us to take because it's unsecured. It's not backed by the government. It's just if that corporation goes under, you're holding that. But is it worth it for 2 to 3, 4 basis points more? We don't feel it is. So right now, most of our investments for our school districts are treasuries, agencies, and certificates of deposits, and of course the ISLAF money market account. So I'm going to flip to the yield curve, and what this is the treasury yield curve. The dotted line is what the yield curve was a year ago, and what this represents is T-bill rates from the left, from 1 month to the right of 30 years. So you can see a year ago, even rates were still above zero. The Fed has started increasing its rate hike, which again, historic rate hike over 5.5% within a little over a year. Rates were still pretty low a year ago. Today, the top line, we're at 5.5%. And I don't know if anyone's keeping abreast of what's going on right now. The minutes came out for the Fed meeting. I fully expect another rate hike. There's a meeting in September, if not in September, but a little later. I know the markets are expecting. So what the yield curve represents is what the markets expect rates to be. These are what the rates are, but what it implies is if the 2-year rate is lower than what the money market rate is right now, that implies that 2 years from now, the rates are going to be a lot lower, which would mean the Fed started cutting a year from now. And that's what the markets still are expecting. But at the same time, based on the minutes I read that just came out today, I fully expect at least one more increase, if not in September, but then in the December meeting, we probably will at least have one more increase. And that's where I talked about, because of this Cook County tax issue, you're actually getting a pretty good rate, even just in a money market account. You're getting over 5%. And let's face it, 5%, it's a great rate. If you actually go out longer, if I were to invest you in a 2-year T-bill, which again, I wouldn't right now because the uncertainty of your cash flow because of Cook County doesn't allow us to, or at least doesn't make us comfortable to do it. You would actually invest that somewhere around 475. So again, with the uncertainty, with everything going on, keeping a little more liquid, you're actually doing pretty good given the circumstances, given the cards that you're dealt with. And this next graph kind of illustrates that is, what are the rates? 3-month rates, 6-month rates, they're in the 540s, I'm sorry. As opposed to if you go out a little longer, they're in the 4s. We probably wouldn't get to that longer term investment right now, again, given the uncertainty, but at the same time, I wouldn't feel all that bad because you are making a pretty substantial rate of return on a monthly basis as opposed to a 2-year investment. I kind of rambled on that, but that's a part I kind of excel in, but I do like to talk about it. But any questions on that piece of it? All right, so last slide we have is just your kind of the performance report right now. And so here's your total return right now is 1.1%. That is a little misleading because, again, when I mentioned, and I'll go back to this slide here. When rates were at 0%, the district had the foresight to say, okay, we can invest. You were investing at 1% when rates were at 0%. That stuff needs to kind of come off. So this is this little step ladder right here is all those long-term investments that when districts were not investing, you were invested at 1%. Everyone else was at literally 0.01 or 0.02%. You were making more money. But unfortunately, not unfortunately, but that's just a matter of the way investments work, right? The Fed embarked on a historical rate increase. So now we're at 5%. So any reinvestment we're going to do is going to be at 5%. So currently what we're doing is your fixed, and again, this is your fixed income investments. You have another about 40 million that's earning 5% just in a money market. But this is just those fixed term investments, your term series, and then those treasuries that you own. Yeah, they're earning 1%, but they're about to roll off. They're going to roll off within next year, and then you're going to reinvest those at the higher rate. But that higher rate will be probably, if you reinvest it today, would be about 5.37%. So this is just giving you an indication of, again, you did great. The district actually did really well during this 0 rate environment. And now you're set up, if you didn't have that Cook County cash flow issue, you're set up to take advantage of these longer term investments at higher investment rates. So that'll conclude my prepared remarks. Any other questions or this great conversation?
Thanks, Mel. I have one question, which is, is there an opportunity to take the stuff that's, even though it's going to come off in a year, to terminate that and reinvest it, refinance that?
Yep.
And at a favorable.
We are constantly looking at swap opportunities for our clients. So and specifically, absolutely what you're saying is, can I sell that treasury that I have at 1%? Maybe take a little loss in that, but can I reinvest it at a higher rate? Unfortunately, markets are extremely efficient, and generally those swaps work when I could sell a treasury and swap you into a CD. Because you're going into different investment classes. Right now, banks are flush with cash. They're slowly coming into the market, but they're not really offering too many opportunities. So what happens is the loss you would take on that 1% investment would not make up for that 5% gain or the 4% gain or whatever you want to call it. So if you look at your investment report, you're probably booking a unrealized loss on that investment. That loss I can't make up on flipping it to another treasury because markets are really efficient. Now, keep in mind, yes, we are constantly looking at swap opportunities into CDs, and CDs are one of our biggest investment vehicles. Banks are unfortunately flush with cash. They're getting back in the market. So yes, we would bring those opportunities to Tony and Brian as they come up going forward. That
Any other
answer?
questions for Fennell or for the administration? Investment policy, investment practices.
So did you say there's another 40 million, like in a money market account? In addition, so this 60, when we talk about the fund balance in here, that's the 67.
And Brian, I was kind of just shooting off I'm not really sure what the liquid balance is right now.
That's just in the operating cash flow, basically.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So if you were looking at the cash flow chart, there's a thin blue line at the bottom that's their liquidity, and then there's all that sort of mint green on the top that's not invested. And then the part in the middle is what's in that report. Does that sound right now?
Under the
Yep.
blue line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So if I look at your cash flow line right now, we're looking at, you probably should have somewhere around, maybe not 40, it's about 25 to 30 right now. But that's again, money that you're using to pay payrolls, AP, but some of these investments are going to roll off, so they'll add to that liquidity piece. So if you, I can pull that graph up again. So this graph, so you're going to spend money, but at the same time, your investments are maturing. So that's adding to, it's basically the difference between this and this. The top line and the dark blue line. The dark blue graph.
And could you briefly talk to the ISLAP fund and the money market and how that program works?
Sure. So ISLAP is it's sponsored by 3 main associations for school, for Illinois school districts. It's sponsored by IASB, IASBO, and IASA, excuse me. And what it is, it's governed by a board of directors. The directors are members of school board associations, the superintendents, and business managers. They went to RFP, bid out various services that are needed to run a money market fund. They selected PMA, excuse me, to run that fund. There was another firm before. And basically the money market fund is the multi-class. They have a money market fund, but at the same time, we also offer fixed term investments through liquid asset fund, which is the securities, cash flow services, the bond proceeds management services that I believe you're taking advantage of as well. So it's all-inclusive investment vehicle for school districts statewide. So far, right now, the fund itself, we have about 500 school districts that are participants. And quite honestly, and you named the Northern Illinois School District, they're probably a member of the fund.
Thank you.
One more.
Sure.
So, you've made numerous comments that we're, done really well and, in terms of our investment. But I'm more of a number than an adjective, an adverb thing. So are there indices that we measure ourselves against, that we can look at, you know, I mean, I know with all my investments, you get, this one's in this place and you get
Yep.
a benchmark that says it's doing 4% and you did 3% or 5%.
Yeah, so benchmarks are a big part of an investment advisor. We can give you a benchmark, generally most school districts. So again, I can give you a benchmark, but keep in mind, benchmarks are constantly invested in that investment pool. The one thing that would have thrown any benchmark I gave you this year was the Cook County piece of it. Because if I said you had a 180-day benchmark in treasuries, all of a sudden you didn't have a 180-day duration, if that makes sense. So yes, based on your cash flow, we can certainly give you a benchmark that you can measure us against and how we did going forward.
Yeah, you can pass that on to Audra. I think that'd be a
Yep.
good thing for us to revisit at a future meeting later in the year.
Yeah, so we'll give you a couple of options on the benchmarks because there's a few of them that you can choose from, and absolutely we can give you some options and talk about which one works. And quite honestly, it might be a blend of a couple of different ones.
So the benchmark that you have listed there then on page 44, what is that then? How should we use that? And how should it be interpreted?
So unfortunately, the benchmark is as of today. So what is that? What would that portfolio earn today? You invested a bunch of stuff. So I would have to give you that benchmark number 2 years ago or a year ago, because your investments were executed 2 years ago or a year ago, when rates were at 0, you were earning 1%. So you would have blown through that benchmark a year ago. And I get it. Yeah, it says 5%. Right now you're earning 1%. What's the difference for now? What's going on? And unfortunately, it's if you invested your portfolio, all of it today, that's what you would earn, as opposed to going back 2 years ago. That benchmark would have been 0.1%, and you would have been at that 1%.
So now, just a quick comment though. One thing I think could be beneficial, can you talk about hypothetically, in a 2-year period when we go to reinvest, and let's say we reinvest similar to what the yield curves are predicting, it's very possible that we'll be in something, say a 4.2%, but then when the markets come back down, we would see an inverse at that time, where if the market was saying that you'd be at 2% is benchmark, we'd be at the 4.2 or 4.3 because it's based on the time. So that's kind of the pros and the cons of the laddering concept that we do, is we're always doing well for the time period that we're in. But then while we wait for the maturity, we're not chasing the market as much as having more of a sound long-term investment plan.
So again, the part of the problem, the biggest issue would be that right now I would have invested you. Did you see how this dark line drops? I would have extended that dark line. You're not in deficits, or you're not dropping balances to the point where we can't reinvest you in some of these investments. The only reason we don't feel comfortable investing you in some of these investments right now is because of Cook County. And so you're on, I have your portfolio in front of me. You have some 1%, you have some 0.02 or 0.2s, you have 0.8s, but at the same time, we would have invested you in the fall at 5%. We couldn't. In fact, the opposite happened, that we had to sell some of your investments. And that's really the biggest kind of monkey wrench into this benchmark conversation. Otherwise, the benchmark would be fine. You probably would be somewhere in the 4% on your reinvestments. If we reinvested you to where you normally would be on these long-term investments, you probably would be at 4%. keep in mind also that that benchmark at this end of this presentation does not account for your money market rate, which is earning you 5%. This is only fixed term. This is only the stuff that's been invested to a fixed duration. Again, that 35 million that's sitting in money market SDA, everything else, which is earning at 5%, is not within this 1.1%. So your actual total portfolio rate is more probably like 3 to 4%, 3 to 4% right now. And the difference between the 3 to 4% to the 5% is the Cook County effect.
Any other questions or comments on this?
So the monthly treasury report that we get, one of the asks is what's our weighted, what are we earning? And it's been presented as just described, which is that 1% on the fixed amount, when in reality we have this weighted average that's 3 or 4% because of that amount. And at least for me, what I was asking is what's in terms of being able to communicate externally to the community, right? Because they're not used to the shackles that we have. But what are we earning on our money? From my perspective, it should be that 3.5 number. That it should be our total investments of what we're earning, not a segment that is handled that.
All right, so we'll work with Brian and Tony to come up with a better reporting tool for you to be able to put those. Brian, Tony, you good with that?
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree.
And I agree with you. It is, the 1.1% is absolutely misleading because it is a part of your investments.
Drives me crazy because you're going to report that says you're hearing all this. We got all this money invested at 5%, which is great, and we're earning 1% is what's in a report that is available to the public. So,
Well, we understand.
basically, as of this date,
So blended rate for your total portfolio for the
yes.
month.
What are we earning on our investments? Not any subcategory, but as a whole package. Bingo.
We can work on that. Yep.
How unusual is it for the long-term investments to be earning less than the liquid investment? So that's very unusual
It's
because of this moment in time with the Fed rates and all that, right?
yes, absolutely.
I mean,
So unprecedented. Well, I'm sorry. I'm not going to say unprecedented. There have been when the Fed increases rates, short-term moves quicker than the long-term. What's unprecedented about these times is the Fed has never gone from 0 to 5% within 1 year. Usually it's quarter. I mean, they went 0.25%, 0.75% at a time, and 0.5% at a time from 0 to 5%. So that's if I go back to this, where's my yield curve? Sorry, this move from here to here, unprecedented, and that's where now the invert sloping yield curve that's happened before. And we've been there. We have been at points where money market rates have been higher than a 2-year treasury. And that's when we have a recession. And those are signs or indications, or at least historically, we keep saying that, but it hasn't happened yet. Historically, an inverted yield curve is a recessionary indication. If the market expects longer term rates to be lower, why are they lower in the longer term? That's because the Fed had to lower rates. Why did the Fed have to lower rates? It's because, well, we're in a recession and they have to get the economy moving. Right now, they want to cool the economy, and that's why they raise rates. But if they want to speed up the economy, they lower rates. But to your point, the increase has never happened in this pace.
thank you.
The other point that kind of goes along with that is right now the district's in a little bit of a unique situation in that not only do we have the Cook County situation going on, but with Project 2 coming up, we have $100 million project that we're looking at where nearly half of it is planned to be spent from district reserves. So that has also kind of curbed our ability a little bit to stretch out some investments to that 3-4 year time frame, because we know we're going to be drawing down our fund balance quite significantly over the next 2 to 3 years. So in addition to some of the liquidity concerns caused by the county, we've been hesitant to go out too far with our investments like we used to in the past. In the past, taxes would come in and we could automatically look at an investment of 2 to 3 years because we were sitting on 80 to 90% fund balance. And we didn't have concerns about meeting the ongoing obligations of payroll and accounts payable and whatnot. So with those construction plans in place, it kind of adds another factor to all of this in terms of what kind of maturities we can look at and what kind of investments make the most sense once we kind of get out on a 1 to 2 to 3 year outlook for the portfolio.
Anything else? You did a great job pitching for now. Appreciate it. And tell Audrey, hope she's feeling better soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. And Brian, Tony will talk to you about the performance.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
All right, our next agenda item is the tentative budget and updated 5-year projections. Brian, are you taking the lead on that?
Yes. Let me just share my screen here. There we go. Okay, so we've got a budget and financial projection update for the committee tonight. Just to kind of circle back for a minute, when our committee last met in June, we did a deep dive into the first draft of the budget for fiscal year 24. Last week, actually, we presented the board with an updated version called the tentative budget. So tonight, the point of tonight's presentation is to kind of circle back with a similar presentation for the CFC, recap the changes that have been made to the budget, and then provide an update on our 5-year financial projection. So this first slide I have in here is just a high-level summary of how the budget has changed since June. Total revenues, the top line, have increased about $165,000. That's a result of our federal grant awards being finalized in the last couple months. And then we also had the inclusion of some graduation fees, which have been missing from our preliminary budget. So not a significant change here from June to August. For expenditures, you'll notice the most notable change is within the capital expenditures line. Now that our spending for fiscal year 23 has been finalized, we've been able to modify the budget to reflect the remaining amounts owed on Project 1 and the athletic fields contracts, with those projects scheduled to be wrapped up in fiscal year 24. Then we also made an adjustment for Project 2 to shift some of the costs that we originally had slotted into the last month or two of fiscal year 24 into fiscal year 25. The combination of those two things was a reduction to capital expenditures of about $1.2 million for fiscal year 24. Then looking at some of the other areas of the budget, we had some increases on the purchase services line for transportation services and some additional grant expenses. And then on the line below that, there were some equipment orders that were delayed near the end of fiscal year 23 And we had to rebudget for those again in fiscal year 24, due to a timing matter. We had some reductions in salaries and benefits based on the personnel changes and changes in employee benefit elections. And we've also lowered our tuition estimates as we've gotten closer to the start of school and more special education student placements have been finalized. So that tuition is located within the line labeled other objects. So if we're looking at these changes as a whole, the items marked on this slide with an asterisk impact the district's operating fund balance. The total of those lines added together is a net increase in operating funds of a little under 1.2 million as compared to the preliminary version of the budget. So here we've got an updated look at the budget's impact on the district's fund balance. The top half of the slide shows operating funds, and in the column second from the right, we have the tentative budget anticipating a decline in fund balance of 1.3 million in fiscal year 24. So that would bring us down to a fund balance of 60.3 million at the end of the year, which when we look at our fund balance policy, that equates to about 70% of operating expenditures. You'll also see that we have factored in here transfers of $9.3 million coming out of operating funds and going into the capital projects fund in the lower section of the slide to help cover our ongoing capital work. So now that the tentative budget is complete, we have a better idea of how the next 11 months will look. However, this is also an ideal time to expand on that by updating our 5-year financial projection. There is a full projection and set of assumptions in tonight's meeting materials, but I wanted to show a condensed version here on this slide just to kind of point out where this budget positions us beyond fiscal year 24. So the row highlighted in green towards the bottom of the slide tracks the district's operating fund balance at the end of each year as a percentage of operating expenditures. That measurement comes straight from our fund balance policy, which at the recommendation of this committee has now been revised to target a narrower range of 25 to 50%. So this row is something we pay very close attention to when compiling the projections and the annual budget. As you can see, the tentative budget is keeping us right on track with that goal. We do have a brief increase in fund balance projected for fiscal year 25 due to the expected issuance of debt certificates for Project 2 funding, but then it drops off pretty sharply in the following year because of funds transferred to the capital funds for Project 2 spending. So then when we get to the expected completion of Project 2 in fiscal year 27, that formula lands at 35%. So pretty much right in the middle of that targeted fund balance range that we've set. Then for comparative purposes, I've also included a line here at the bottom of this slide that lists the fund balance percentages from our previous financial projection. So that was the March 15th debt certificate scenario that we were using in our decision-making process for Project 2 financing. And I wanted to have those numbers here sort of as a baseline so that as time goes by and other financial decisions are being evaluated, we can make sure we're not veering too far off course from that plan that we were putting in place back during those discussions. If we were to use this budget as one of those decision points, you can see that while there are some fluctuations between the two projection models in certain years, they end up in nearly the same place by years 4 and 5 of the projection. So to me, this is another sign that the tentative budget is continuing to guide us towards that place we're hoping to be 5 years from now, given our current set of assumptions. Here's a graphical view of that same information. The green and red lines represent the top and bottom ends of our targeted fund balance range. And then the orange bars are the projected end of year fund balance. So you can see we're expected to be within our target range in each of the last 3 years of this 5-year projection. So as we move forward, there's a few areas we'll be monitoring in the first few months after September's budget adoption. The first one we've already talked about quite a bit in the PMA presentation, and that's the Cook County property tax delay. We do have that expectation of the 4-month or so delay that's expected. That is built into our budget. But if for some reason that delay gets extended, we would then be forced to keep more funds liquid in order to meet those ongoing obligations like we talked about, and we would see a negative impact on interest earnings. Second is the unpredictable nature of corporate personal property replacement tax revenues. This revenue source is currently being used to help fund our capital work. We do tend to budget conservatively in this area just because it has been so hard to predict. But if revenues were to come up short, it would mean that we need to dip further into our reserves to fund those projects. Those revenues come in 8 installments over the fiscal year. We've received 2 already, which are pretty much right on pace with what we were getting last year. But the state has come out with some updated estimates saying they expect a decline of, I believe it was about 25 or 26% in the upcoming year. So that's been another reason for us to keep that budget conservative in that area. Then in the third bullet point, we've talked before about how our insurance year for employee benefits runs on the calendar year rather than the fiscal year. So that just means that rate increases for 2024 calendar year are not typically finalized until October after the budget has been adopted. And then lastly, we have Project 2 quickly approaching. Bid results and a more precise construction schedule are not expected until a little later this fall. So we will all be anxiously awaiting that information to see how it affects our budget and our financial projections. And then from a funding perspective, we'll also be staying in close contact with the Imagine Foundation in an effort to cut down on some of the uncertainty that is inherent in trying to predict the timing and amount of donations that might be received. So the basis for this slide is really just to point out that in any budget, there are always some unknowns, regardless of how much planning goes into it. So we'll be keeping a close eye on these items in particular, just so we are prepared to adjust our plans throughout the year as needed. Any questions from the committee on tentative budget?
I just have a comment, in relation to the corporate personal property replacement tax. A little bit ahead of it's page 26 of the packet. Sorry, 27. That's roughly $4 million in this year's budget, just to give everybody a point of reference, in relation to property taxes, which is close to 80 million. And you can see that the budget is conservative with a fairly significant drop from last year's actual. Anyone have questions for Brian or Tony about the updated financials?
Yeah.
Okay,
But they have, the other day you guys approved that small security contract with the other with the. And the kind of the small contracts you approved, like, I don't know if they're called securities, building ground or something.
Yeah, buildings and grounds and our safety security.
Safety and security.
Yeah, we're just,
Was that included in this? I know it's.
That has not been updated yet.
That's not, okay, so like that salary and benefits will probably not be as negative or positive.
We still have to, we still have to evaluate that. So when we come back with final budget in September, it'll include another round of updated financial projections, and then we'll have it in for that round.
Okay.
Yeah, really anything you saw voted on at the prior board meeting would not be included in the tentative budget because we cannot make the assumption that it'll be approved or not approved. So we wait for that final confirmation and then we make the adjustment between the tentative and final budget period.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure.
But the, what was approved was, you know, within the guidance of what our long-term projection model is. It was pretty darn on top of it. So I would not, I would not expect a big change based on that
I would agree.
over the long 4-year period.
Yes, you're 100% accurate.
Wow. I've never been.
100% spot
Holy crap, I think I'm gonna retire. I think I'm gonna retire. My question or ask is this, and I'm looking at this on my phone, but you added in, I think, at the request of the board, the line on the 5-year projection model that had the baseline from March. That was the ask. So thank you. I think that was the piece added, correct?
Yes.
So that's great, and that I greatly appreciate that. You know, as we move through these fields project and then into project 2, you know, the challenge I see, you know, we want to make sure where we land in terms of total, those are all huge assumptions in decision making. So just providing a way to, I guess, keep true to what our, you know, we made decisions at a certain point. And so I always like to look at data then versus when we made those decisions to know, you know, how true things came out. So adding that baseline was favorable, was helpful. And then as we finish up the track and field or the fields project, knowing how that fit in, because that's a big chunk of capital. Project 2 is going to be, you know, years of time, but that would be helpful as well. If you follow me. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, one of the things that we talked about sometime in the last year when we tried to do a backward looking review of our past projections and kind of see how close or far away they were. One of the issues we ran into was inconsistency in format and changing things. And so I really appreciate that we kind of locked into a format. I really like, instead of just then us having to sit, okay, here's the last one, here's the next one, and what changed, having a summary recap of the changes is really helpful too. And I'll echo that, like having a stake in the ground for the spring to always kind of look back to it and measure where we're at in relation to that is good too. And it's good to hear that the board made changes to the fund balance policy because I hadn't heard that was official. Anyone have other questions or comments on the tentative budget and updated projections? So that the board will be approving final budget next month.
I had a question on the projections, because I know you guys talked about it last time, the meeting which I missed, but you guys talked a lot about enrollment, did we finalize that discussion on using it more for forecasting? Are we gonna come back to that at some point?
We're definitely going to come back to the staffing conversation in the upcoming meeting, which is really what the enrollment drives,
Right.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah, we actually discussed that in our planning meeting. And at this meeting, and determined I think best to bring that forward at a time where it's, most accurate and relevant for moving forward this school year.
If there aren't any other questions or comments on this agenda item, we can kind of move to meeting dates for the year and future agenda items, so that's the perfect segue, Pedro. And anything else for Tony or Brian on updated table stuff? Okay, I'm gonna kind of combine then the meeting dates for this year as well as the future agenda items. Our charge from the board is that we meet at least quarterly. We certainly were overachievers last year on that. I would expect it's probably gonna be in a typical uneventful year, probably more like 5 or 6 meetings. I started kind of roughing this out, but wanted your input on topics especially. There's a few kind of locked in things that are gonna be typical at certain times of year all the time. But then we've got some flexibility on other things to include. So the first thing, our next meeting is probably gonna be sometime in October. The board, Cook County tax revenue and bills are late, but the calendar for the district's levy process never changes. And so I think us reviewing the tax levy in October, then the board reviews the tentative levy in November and approves it in December. It is gonna kind of be a fixture for the committee. And then we talked about the staffing piece, kind of the follow-up to the enrollment projection conversation. Timing of that being December, January, kind of before the district is starting to plan staffing for the coming school year and starting the budget process for the next year. And then sometime in the spring being our first look at the budget then for the following school year. So those would be kind of 3 sort of fairly locked in recurring topics in any given year. And then a few other things that I had listed that we talked a bit about the evidence-based funding formula at the past meeting, the district's process for kind of measuring their staffing levels in relation to that. So I think that would piggyback on the staffing meeting. And then a couple other things that I had were something about debt. We talked about it in relation to how we fund project 2. So we have some of that background on the different types of borrowing options and all of that. But as the district gets further along towards planning to issue debt for project 2, and we'll certainly have that as an agenda item, but the timing of that is still a bit fluid. And then the other topic I had was the federal ESSER funding that came from the pandemic. There's been a number of articles in the paper in the last few weeks about how districts spent those funds, and districts that just put it all into hiring people are now finding themselves in trouble with districts that use it for one-time things. So I think that would be a good topic for us to just kind of get a report from the administration on how those funds were used, what the goals for that were as that program is winding down. I think that would be helpful for the community to kind of hear how those were invested in the district's programming. But what else would you guys like to sort of dive into in the coming year? And while you're thinking about it, I'm gonna see if I can find that list of the committee's charge here in the folder. I think I found it.
Good work.
How about that? So let me just run through this real quick for everybody. 5-year projections, check. Evidence-based funding model, we just talked about investment stuff, check. Budget process, we're all over. Comparative data is something that we did probably first or second meeting of the committee, so that's been a year plus. So that might be something we can revisit. Let's see.
What do you mean by comparative data?
Well, the way it reads here is review the district's fiscal performance relative to other comparable districts. I think I put it together utilizing forecast 5 tool. The audit, actually selecting the audit firm. I guess that would only come into play if you're doing an RFP and going through that process. So that's one that you'll just have to loop us into that's the case. Legislative issues is something we haven't really gone into. Improving communication and transparency on the district's finances is something that we could probably spend some more time on. You mentioned just real specifically the treasury report or whatever the board packet, but maybe would be step back and more holistically kind of look at what the financial information that goes out to the community or goes to the board. Policies we spent a lot of time on. Yeah, that's about it. And we don't have to come up with a list now if people want to shoot me ideas. That would be great at a later date too, but I think at this point, we want to plan on a meeting in October. I don't know if Lisa, if it's easy to throw out a couple dates now, or if that's something that we'll do via email later.
I'll do the email to the
Okay.
board.
October, what was the second one?
And then December, January. It would be January, just because December meetings are hard. Schedules to move around.
I think the list is, good, and I do think there's been a lot of progress in terms of covering all the bases, so now it's kind of moving back. My only ask would be, as it relates to the 5-year projection model, and this is probably gonna be a loop back into the enrollment piece. I believe it would be beneficial that really the changes that are made, I mean, the assumptions in the projection model drive the projection model. And so I've always been wanting more formality in those assumptions and how they're changed. And I feel this committee, should be sitting there saying, okay, we've agreed that based on what it is, we're gonna change the projection, the enrollment model block. We're gonna change our assumptions, some of the district, I think would have a clear recommendation. But I do think it would be beneficial that there's some formality in how those assumptions are changed so that it's there's discipline.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. I think we spent a lot of time looking at projections, but really just through the lens of throwing capital scenarios at it more so than what are some of the key assumptions driving revenues and expenses otherwise. We did review it at one point in time, probably before you were on the committee, Kathleen, but it has been a little while, and that's something we should, even if we're looking at the projections multiple times a year, we should at least be reviewing assumptions.
And I'm going back, we have had issues where like the CPI assumption, right, was different than what the 97 is using and that others are using, so maybe there's a gradient of CPI between here and the other schools, but it doesn't make sense that we would have assumptions. Some assumptions are unique to us, some assumptions should be macro.
So one of our final meetings should maybe be like a review for the year, and then maybe a goal planning for the next year in June or July, whenever our last meeting is. Or whenever the last meeting is, the next meeting, just to go over that kind of thing.
It's a good idea. We missed our review meeting. This is kind of a bit of a goal planning session here for the coming year for sure. Any other thoughts or suggestions from anyone? Great.
So maybe just in the category of 2 cents. First of all, I'm thrilled to be on this committee with all of you. And I look forward to getting to know and working with our community volunteers. I was previously on the District 97 School Board, and we made tremendous use of our what was called financial responsibility. Steve Miller was an integral part of that teamwork. And as I think about the goal setting process that our board is going to go into in September, I think that coming out of that, there's probably gonna be some great ideas about how to really leverage this community. I realize it's kind of a 50,000 foot notion right now, but I think it'll get more granular after September. And further to that point, you know, when I think about a school board making tremendous use of its community finance committee, I would think that meeting at least every other month would be a bare minimum. I can't fathom really having this, you know, just be quarterly type support. The last thing I'll share is a personal interest I have in initiatives around that first thing you mentioned, which is you called it comparative data. And I think there's a link between this comparative data, what I might label as benchmarking, having a dashboard around this kind of benchmarking, and then being really effective about how that information is communicated both to the board for its use, but also to the community at large. And, you know, we even discussed one aspect of that tonight, which is, well, kind of this oddball metric showed up in a PMA report, and it goes into the record as the workings of this committee. And it will create, you know, confusion at best. So as we dig in this school year, that's going to be a key interest of mine that I'll be looking forward to working with everyone on, is this combination of comparative data, benchmarking, dashboarding, and effective communication of all that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have added a report on the district's goals to as an agenda item for our October meeting. Yeah, I would love to have the board continue to leverage us like they did in the spring, but maybe with fewer meetings. But I would agree. I think more than quarterly would be good. And that was kind of why I was trying to shoot for December, not January, for the meeting after the levy conversation, just to try to keep it on a every other month cycle. But again, December is just sort of hard with winter break and things to schedule, but we would certainly shoot for it. Anything else from anyone?
So are we just gonna do the next year's meetings later? And now we got October and January, so we'll just.
Is it possible to kind of lock in dates for the whole school year? Probably easier for the district folks, right?
I prefer that.
Okay.
We can work on this.
Okay, great. I know you have lots of other meetings to work it around, so yeah, you need to bring the best dates to us, and then we can go up to that.
We have a few meetings.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you everyone for your time.
Yeah, we'll try to actually lock in not only just the dates, but at least we can talk and see if we can find a way for them to fall on a predictable pattern, right? So
I think we've typically been doing it the week between your board meetings, but
we have, I think, and maybe my memory is really influenced largely by the number of meetings we had last year, and they were all over Mondays, Wednesdays, you know, I would like to really nail that down.
yeah, that'd be great.
So,
That works better for everybody.
yeah. So
Do I need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Have a good night.